And just as a reminder also, if we keep all of our questions, like technical questions, in the Q&A function, and then just general chatter in the chat function, so two different avenues there, just helps our moderators to keep on track of everything. That'd be fantastic. Today's topic is on-road cycling facilities. So previously we spoke about off-road, shared paths, things like that, getting us well away from the carriageway. Now we're going to talk about, well, once we don't have that luxury, we can't actually provide that clear separation from the carriageway. How can we provide facilities that accommodate cyclist movements safely and they feel comfortable riding on road? And that's what today's topic is all about. I did want to just go through a few things from our previous session just to close out. I had this wonderful submission from a participant just of a shared path near their location that they wanted to share with us, and I thought it was pretty interesting. Look how close those signposts are to the shared path or on the shared path. And another really, really good kind of rule of thumb is if your stencil does not fit on the shared path, I don't think you can call it a shared path. So that one's an absolute shocker. I'm not sure how this one got over the line, but there you go. Thanks for providing that. I also remember we had a comment just on the use of rumble strips on shared paths or bike paths, and I just thought I'd show this as an example of what that is. So if you're a rider riding along there, this is a zebra crossing where pedestrians have priority. They've got right of way there. So you can see that there's those transverse bars. They've got the slightest of lips on them, like 2 mil or something like that. And they're also a different material. So not only are they like a visual thing that you can see, like something is different, but as you ride over them, they give you this haptic warning. And haptic just means like you can feel it, like a vibration. And I think it's a really good way to, illustrate that, okay, something's changing about this environment. Riders, you need to slow down and you need to yield to pedestrians in that space. So I do like that approach. Other practitioners seem to get very worried about, the friction issues caused by those things or just how annoying they are for riders. But I think that's quite a negligible concern. And I tend to be more considerate of people that are trying to cross there and, potentially not sure who's got right of way there. We gave you some examples in the 360-degree video to ride through. The example on the left there and the example on the right, example 2. I think we've actually got a poll for this, Marissa. If we could launch module 2 poll, please. So even if you haven't had a chance to watch that video yet, just based on what you're seeing there in the slide, which example do you think shows best practice design for a shared path crossing over a road? And I'll give you 20 seconds to fill that in. All right, another 5 seconds. Don't need to overthink this one. We're not marking you on this. All right, and we might just close the poll there and share the results. And I'm seeing the majority of us saying that example 1 is an example of best practice. And I would agree with that because you've got the continuous facilities there for the rider. They don't have to stop and give way to cars. They've got the priority there, as opposed to example 2, where the shared path just kind of ends and then they have to cross over before it begins again. Also, due to the raised crossing point, something that we really like to see, just to ensure that drivers are actually giving way. So good to see that we've got some overwhelming consensus there. Just wanted to remind everyone or let everyone know that we don't have Wally in today's presentation. So you don't need to be on the scavenger hunt for Wally. He's not going to make an appearance. So don't get, oh, I've got an applause for that. Oh, people are happy to see him gone. He will be back though, so don't get too excited, but he's not in today's session. Now all the emojis are coming through. I should have mentioned I get very distracted by emojis. It's kind of like the moth that just stares at the light, and like that's just my focus. I don't know, like a Labrador. I can't focus on two things. Today's agenda is on-road facilities, and what we'll be talking about first is protected bicycle lanes or separated cycling facilities. And we'll talk about the different configurations associated with that. So you typically just got one-way facilities or bi-directional. Also wanted to have a bit of a discussion around the separator types, because we do have a raft of options available if you are in the design or implementation space. And some people get this idea of what a protected bicycle lane needs to look like, and it can be a very expensive project to achieve that, or there are, much more, cost-effective solutions as well. So I just want to show that full range so you're understanding of that. We'll also talk about on-road bicycle lanes and the inherent risks associated with that, specifically dooring. And we'll talk about some ways that we can help to reduce that as a risk if we're unable to install the protected bicycle lanes. Finally, we'll just have a discussion around this idea of mixing traffic. So that's where riders can actually claim the traffic lane. So they don't have to ride as close to the curb as possible. They can ride right in the middle of the traffic lane. We'll talk about when that treatment may be appropriate and what we can do to help support that and encourage that, because it does, needs to be really thought out about where that's appropriate and how can we ensure that our riders feel, safe doing that. But we will get started with our protected bicycle lanes. And this is an example of a very good protected bicycle lane. This is in Melbourne. And what we're seeing here is, just to give you a bit of context, traditionally, the way our carriageways have been constructed, so the typical cross-section would have had this space here as the parking lane, and then right up against the parking lane is where the bicycle lane would be. So traditionally, we have our bicycle lane within the dooring zone, meaning that's where, parked vehicles swing open their door. So it's got that as a risk, but also riders on their other side have got a live traffic lane. So there's that risk as well. On-road bicycle lanes are not an incredibly favorable treatment in terms of safety, but also in terms of the perception of safety. So most riders feel a lot more comfortable and safe riding in this type of facility, a protected bicycle lane, as opposed to riding within the dooring zone and adjacent the live traffic lane. So the way the protected bicycle lanes are set up is it swaps where the bicycle lane and where the parking lane would go. So you see how now the bicycle lane is hard up against the curb and channel. The parking lane gets pushed out, and then there's some degree of separation provided there, referred to as a separator. Okay, so you've got your parking lane, your separator, and then your protected bicycle lane. So it's just swapping those two design elements so that riders now are outside of the dooring zone, and they also are not riding adjacent the live traffic lane. So they've got a much more protected space. You can also think of it as like the parking lane is acting as a barrier, kind of like a roadside barrier. So if there was an errant vehicle, it's much more likely to collide with a parked vehicle than, collide with someone riding within that space. So the reason that I popped this example up. There's many, many different protected bicycle lanes I could have put up. But I like this one in particular because of the width of this facility. As you can see in this photo, it actually allows for two riders to ride side by side or ride abreast. And I think that's a really sensible idea where you do have that carriageway space available, because if you've got long lengths of protected bicycle lanes, you're basically creating this tunnel where it's not necessarily easy for riders to be able to overtake or maneuver around others and things like that. But this facility is deliberately designed with, the understanding that, there are different cycling speeds and confidence levels. And if you are riding a tandem bicycle or you've got a bike trailer with the kids and you're just pottering along, that's okay. There's still space there for another rider behind you who's perhaps commuting to work or is in a rush, and they can safely pass you. The narrower that you make this and the less that opportunity is provided, the more likely it becomes that those commuter riders just ignore this facility and ride on the road. So I like this as an example because there is that space provided. Now, I touched on this before and I just shared my own vision on it, but this is some actual data that you can, take away from today's module. A protected bicycle lane. The City of Melbourne completed a study a few years ago now and interviewed the community about how they feel in different types of cycling environments. 83% of responders said that they feel confident to ride in protected bicycle lanes. The painted on-road bicycle lane, only 22% felt comfortable. So it's ironic that, I would say the way that our network is set up, the majority of our infrastructure looks like that, the painted lane, and it only attracts a small portion of the community. Whereas we know that the protected lanes not only offer improved safety benefits, as it reduces the risk of crashes occurring, but also increases the actual chance that you'll get improved participation of riders in that environment. So, more people riding in that facility. So there's lots and lots of benefits associated with the protected bicycle lane design, and the reason that we're, kind of selling it to you now. So hopefully you can take this learning and apply it to your own projects. So there's two common configurations associated with protected bicycle lanes. One is just one-way travel. So a one-way path that is provided on both sides of your carriageway. So this is obviously just an example there, but you've got a protected bicycle lane, you've got a separator, and then your parking lane, and then that is mirrored on the other side. And both of those bicycle lanes only permit one direction of travel. So you couldn't ride in both directions on both sides. Really, really common arrangement. It may look something like this. This is also referred to as a Copenhagen bicycle lane, where you've got kind of these large separators being used at these locations. And I've got a question for the group, so get ready to type your answer in the chat. And my question is, why do you think there are these gaps in the separators? Why wouldn't they just be building a nice long connected facility? And I have already seen the answer come through multiple times. Did I already ask this question? I can't remember. I seem to be losing my mind. It is drainage. It is absolutely drainage, stormwater drainage, absolutely. And so basically, if you provide these gaps as the water is running, it's still able to access your existing curb and channel, your existing drainage lines. And then you don't have to worry about installing new side entry pits and new pipes to the existing lines. It's just, it's a lot cheaper if you just provide those gaps in the separators. So then you don't have to worry about all those things. But this is just an example of a one-way path. The other configuration used within protected bicycle lanes is a bidirectional path. And this is where we've got the bicycle traffic in both directions occurring just on one side of the carriageway. So you can see riders here have got their protected facility only on one side of the carriageway. This is, I would generally say, the least preferred option because it does have its own particular issues associated with it, which I will go through in a moment. But it's not to say that it can't be investigated or it can't be implemented in an effective way. And one of the locations where it is most effective is if you've got activity generators or points of interest that are all located on the one side of the carriageway, then there really is a strong argument to be investigating the bidirectional facility. Or if you don't have lots of crossing points on one side, but on the other side, there's lots of driveways and lots of conflict points and things like that, then that's when you can be like, you know what, let's just put it all on this side because it's going to be a lot smoother ride and there's a lot less conflict going to occur. That's another time where you could be like, this is a very sensible solution. But as I said, there are some particular considerations that you'd need to think through about this design. All right, another question for the group. I've got a bidirectional facility shown here, and this separator that I'm showing looks a lot narrower than the previous ones that I've shown. My question is, why do you think this separator might be narrower? And I'll give you 20 seconds to have a good look at this one because some people may be slower to type. And I'll check in while I'm waiting, actually, to see if I've missed any questions.
Hello. Yes, there's lots of questions, which is great. So thank you, everyone. One question that was raised, which I thought was a really good point. I mean, all questions are great, but I thought this was a really interesting one to share. So with the protected bike lanes, how are cyclists able to sort of like enter and exit, especially at intersections when they wish to turn right, Max? So I guess, yes, considering those movements, entering the separated facility and then exiting to undertake various movements.
Gotcha. Yeah, so let's give a prize out there. It's an excellent question.
Sure.
The best way to do it is through the use of a protected intersection, which is coincidentally our next module's topic. We're going to go through that. And it's basically keeping that protection up all the way to the intersection and then through the intersection as well. So it's very common currently, as in if you look at our current network, to kind of end the protected facility on approach to signalized intersections because it's just been too difficult to design within that space. But we do talk about how we can improve that in our next module. So protected intersections is what I'd answer for that.
Yeah, great. I also sort of mentioned the idea of those head start boxes as well, Max, at signalised intersections to enable cyclists to manoeuvre in front of traffic to be able to make those right turns from a protected facility. Yeah.
Absolutely, yes. Something that we're a big fan of here within Victoria. Some states less so, don't implement them as much, but we see them very, very regularly.
All right, I'll let you continue on, Max. Thank you.
No worries. And Marissa, I'll let you pick maybe the third person who typed in the answer of that there's no parking at this location. Because we are really trying to reduce the risk of dooring with our protected bicycle lane. Well, one of the reasons. And those previous separators were all instances where we had the parking lane adjacent. And so there was a wide separation to actually house the open door. This is an example where this is a through lane. So there's no car parking there. So there's no risk of that dooring, and you can create a narrower separation. Now, in a perfect world, if you had a much, if you had more room to play with, you would certainly still widen the separator just because it's more of a comfortable experience not to be riding so close to live traffic, but acknowledge that in instances where there isn't car parking, you can actually narrow that separation. So excellent to see that got picked up several times, and appreciate that the answer, which was just, using the existing carriageway, is also a very fair response as well. I provided in today's slides this little table which kind of summarizes the pros and cons associated with either one-way or bi-directional facilities. And I'm really just going to focus on these ones here. But I'm just going to do it via figures rather than reading through all this information. I much prefer to sell my story that way. So that one's just there for your records, but we'll talk through it. I think Ken must have put this in my slides. I haven't seen this slide before, so this is exciting for me. Bi-directional to one-way bicycle lanes. This looks like a LinkedIn post I did. The Canadians have it sorted. On the left-hand side of the areas, there is a bike facility running both directions on the side. And yeah, and on the right-hand side, it's basically like this is bi-directional at this stage. And then riders cross over and get to that side there. This is obviously right-hand side for Canada. And that's how it crosses there. So it's got a bi-directional one side of the intersection, and then it's got single directions other side of that intersection. Bit of a strange example. You'd usually keep it quite consistent all the way through there, but shout out to Ken for popping in that post and keeping me on my toes. I don't even remember writing that. So there you go. Marissa, did you know? Have you seen this one?
Yeah, we saw, because just for those playing at home, Ken delivered module 2 of the last course, and I do remember this popping up and him letting him know that you did a post on this.
Oh,
and
how does he remember all this? His memory is out of control.
That man never sleeps, but yeah. So he did tell everyone just to jump over to your profile to check it all out. Yes, I do remember that one.
Oh, thank you. I should have let you explain that one.
Yeah, no, I was keeping you on your toes too. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. So yeah, it's just an example of a bi-directional going to a one direction there. Anywho, I'm going to speak about those considerations that I alluded to before, which you've got associated with bi-directional paths. One of them is associated with vehicles that are exiting minor streets or driveways or things like that. And let's just have a look at this example. So this vehicle here is exiting the driveway. It could be a parking garage or something like that. And this is a one-way street environment. So intuitively, we know that this vehicle exiting is really focusing their attention on all of that oncoming traffic. So to some extent, they will yield or be able to see riders traveling towards them, going in that direction. But riders coming from the other way are a little bit of a surprise. It's a little bit unusual to see that traffic occurring in both directions in those instances, which means you're kind of increasing the risk of a collision occurring from that direction. The way that it is, I suppose, mitigated in this example, and I suppose in most examples in practice, is through the use of conflict paints. You can also highlight there that the direction of travel is both ways, or you can do give way signage, both directions kind of thing. But that is one of the risks associated with this, that general traffic are generally not expecting to see riders traveling both directions. Similar kind of vein is this topic here, where if you were in a vehicle turning right and accessing a driveway or a minor street, and you had to cross over a bi-directional facility, this right-turning vehicle is obviously focused on picking a gap in this traffic. To some extent, they would be able to see cyclists traveling in towards the screen, but the riders that I've circled there in the yellow traveling in the opposite direction, sorry, the same direction as the vehicle turning right, incredibly difficult for them to be able to see them. Like, it's well and truly outside of their field of vision. So one of those arrangements that just do not it doesn't really provide for enhancing your sightlines, and you can have those conflict issues. What I do like about this example is, if you can see, there's this little break in the median, I suppose you could call it there, where a right turn vehicle could really just focus on picking a gap in oncoming traffic and then stop in that little opening section there, yielding to any cycling traffic in there, and then crossing over into the minor leg. So rather than having to do that all in one complete movement, actually providing two separate locations where you perform that turning movements, two different decisions. So that's a good way to be able to mitigate that. By no means am I trying to say that you can't ever do them and they're the worst things. I don't agree with that. I know some jurisdictions are moving away from them, and they're not as fond of them, but I do still think there are examples where they've been installed and they work incredibly well. Okay, as I mentioned, I did just want to talk about some different types of separators, and typically, you know, we may think of this as an example of a protected bicycle lane. Of course, this is a Copenhagen style lane, which has just got this wide separation, and you know, it's got Bluestone curb there, it's got asphalt infill. It's quite expensive to be able to install that. Just wanted to show you some few other options though that we do have with that. But before I get into those details with the separator, I did want to talk about the curb profile, which I know I spoke to in our last module. And I really wanted to talk about how the curb profile can be viewed as a risk to riders. So in an ideal world, we would love to see more forgiving curb profiles being implemented where there is cycling traffic. And by that, I mean, so for those that have never dealt within this space, good on you. I wish that was me, but it is not. We've got these two kind of categories of curb profiles. This first one that I've drawn there, which is just like a straight vertical face, would be referred to as a barrier type curve. And a face that looks more like that with a bit of a chamfer or an angle to it would be referred to as a semi-mountable. There are other curb types. I'm not going to get into every different type, but I just want to focus on these. In a perfect world, what we would love to see is a semi-mountable curb being installed adjacent our cycling facilities, and a barrier curb installed adjacent our parking lane. So just to run through these little photos one by one, on the left-hand side, what we've got is a barrier curb installed on the bicycle lane and the parking lane. So it gets the tick because we want it on the parking lane, but not on the bicycle lane. The middle photo is semi-mountable on both of those sides. So it gets the tick for the bicycle lane, but not for the parking lane. And the final image is where it's a tick and a tick. So semi-mountable on the bike lane, barrier curb on the parking lane. And you're probably asking, why would we care about this? And semi-mountable is more forgiving. If a rider is losing control, veering out of their lane, much more likely to stay on their bike if they collide with a semi-mountable profile. The reason that we don't want to see that on the parking lane side is because it gets way too easy for them to actually mount the separator. And we've seen numerous occasions of this occurring. So this is an example of a semi-mountable curb profile being selected on both the bicycle lane side and the parking lane side. And you just got this row of traffic that are just using the separator as part of their parking lane, which really reduces the effectiveness of the separator. So what we're trying to do is when that door opens, we don't want to see it swinging into the bicycle lane space. Because of that curb profile and drivers are actually choosing to park on the separator, you're reducing that width, and it's becoming more and more likely that that dooring collision could occur. So that's my little rant about the curb profiles. Of course, we're going to get vehicles doing things like this as well, making deliberate decisions to, park in bicycle lanes and things like that. Whichever curb profile you put in, I don't think it's going to affect that type of behavior. You hopefully just, got some good communication there with your enforcement agencies, or your local community would hopefully back you up and agree that that's not an appropriate thing to be doing. Just put this image in here so you can see both sides of that curb a bit clearer. So that's the semi-mountable, that's also semi-mountable, which is why it's so easy to park up on, and that's the barrier curb. So you would ideally see that barrier curb on the parking lane side. I'll check in to see if I've got any questions.
Hello. No, I feel like we're going through them really well, Max. But I will say, how's that like drainage? Is that curb and channel, or is that drainage? So curb and channel looks like it's taking up most of the on-road cycle facility, doesn't it? As well as the separator. So
yeah, so that's a good point. I haven't actually included it in the slides, but where we should actually measure our cycling facility from. So as Catherine mentioned, if you're measuring from that point, which is referred to as the invert, to kind of that point there, that is suggesting that riders would actually use this facility as part of, traveling through that area. And there is a statement within the Austroads Guide's geometric design, which states that's only appropriate where that feature is smooth, there's no awkward lip or transition between the adjacent carriageway and where that is, and it's not like there's not going to be a joint gap either where tires can fit in. So this is an instance where I say would not be appropriate to measure from that, just because that doesn't look particularly comfortable to ride in. And instead, I would suggest you measure your cycling facility from the edge of the curb or the channel there to that there.
I'd almost use the road in this instance.
You
It
might
just
be
looks
tempted
sketchy, doesn't it? With
Yeah.
the, vehicles parking on the separator and then the channel, and you've got pretty limited asphalt space as a cyclist.
The other, I could talk about this site for hours, Catherine. You've got me on a tangent now. But the other common one, which we do see and is also definitely noted as part of this project, is bin collection, the humble bin collection. This is through a residential zone. And previously, I mean, this is a park here, but further up where residents live, they would put their bins on the curbside. as they have always done. However, now a garbage truck is unable to reach that, or has to reach across the bicycle lane, which is not a good outcome. So there have to be changes around how that is managed, and the way that was managed in this instance, which I've seen a lot of times, is actually doing little cuts out of these separators. So don't build it the whole way out. Bit of pavement marking there, and then say, this is where you put your bin. And then you go out there on site, you take all the residents and say, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bins. There's enough space for all of your bins here. This is where it goes. This is where they're collected from, and they get dropped back there. I've been through this site multiple times, and I've seen bins in the bicycle lane, and also dropped off in the bicycle lane as well. So it's still one of those topics that we're you're one of these issues that you'll come across, and I'm overwhelmingly positive about these things, and I think that there's always ways around these things, and I don't think that you can't do it just because of that as an issue. Like, the world will go on if there's a bin in a bicycle lane, but we can be a bit smarter about how we design these things.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Max. Just a question for you on the curb type. If you had to pick barrier, vertical curb, or semi-mountable, which one to pick? Difficult to find different profiles to either side of the separators.
Oh, okay. So if within the separator itself, I couldn't do one side as barrier and I couldn't do the other side as semi-mountable, I would probably say barrier, because I would much rather see vehicles not driving onto the separator.
Thank you. Thanks, Max. And just around research, is there any research to explain vehicles parking on the semi-mountable separators, or is it just behavioural? I'd assume it's behavioural.
I'm not aware of any research within that space, no. So just that guidance that I took you through there. So the City of Melbourne bike lane design guidelines, which we have provided within our resources, that's where that information is kept. So you're more than welcome to reference that. But anything more detailed, I have not seen.
And I'll throw in one more, Max, if we've got time.
Go for it. What
is the preferred design width for the separator when next to parking to allow people exiting the cars to stand on it without having to immediately stand on the bike lane?
Beautiful question. Let's give a prize out there. So a door can swing open approximately 1.2 meters wide. So we love to see our separators being designed with that width in mind, where they are adjacent parking lane. So 1200 mil, that's kind of the minimum that we like to set. I get as narrow as kind of 800, 600 I've seen. That's kind of what we aim for there.
Great. Thank you, Max. I'll let you continue on.
No worries. The other thing with separators that we need to be mindful of is because they do have that, raised feature, how do we provide safe, accessible movements for those with disabilities or vision impairments and things like that? So in particular, if you are working within any environments that have disabled car parking bays, you'd need to have a good think about, well, I can't just extend the separator across them because their ability to be able to, cross over that could be extremely limited. So you'd provide a gap in the separator, and you would also aim to provide a clear crossing point with a curb ramp so they can safely access the adjacent footpath, so they're not searching up the bike path to look for the next curb ramp. Like, it's right there, it's nice and easy. Using, maybe some colored marking to highlight that as a conflict point there. But this is just a reminder that if you've got any disabled car parking bays, to have some specific thoughts through that arrangement there. I've shown this just as an example of what not to do. So this is a zebra crossing across a bicycle lane, which I'm okay with. I think that's okay. As pedestrians kind of walk along here to get to their bus stop. I might zoom in to make this a bit clearer. And what this actually is, there's no curb ramps provided here. So if you're a pedestrian, you have to kind of walk on the footpath level down onto the carriageway, then back up, which is not very accessible at all. And also because that's adjacent a public transport stop, not really a great solution there. So that's kind of ties into what I was saying about before, where you'd really want to ensure that you've maintained that accessibility for not just your riders there, but also those with any disabilities. I also just noted as well, I might just zoom in on this section. It's a lot smaller, but you can see that those little transverse lines, another example of those kind of rumble strips being applied on the cycling facility. So riders got that haptic warning that they're about to come up to a conflict point. All right, different separators. So I showed you, the Copenhagen, the nice wide facilities. We've got these narrow facilities that we can look to install where we don't have any parking lanes adjacent. These ones in particular are quite good because they're bolts down, so you don't need to cast concrete in situ. You just, crane them off the truck, bolt them down, move on to the next one. Other really good thing about these is the idea of kind of trial bicycle treatments or pop-up style interventions. You can say to your community, we're going to give this a go for the next 6 months. We're going to record, community sentiment. In the first 3 weeks, you might have a lot of feedback that's overall negative, and then you'll get nothing at all. And then at the end of the study, you'll probably do a little evaluation and determine that no real changes to traffic behavior have occurred, but there's a hell of a lot more people cycling, and generally people are okay with it. So I love the idea of starting out by trialing this type of infrastructure, and these kind of solutions work very well. Planter boxes I've seen quite often being used as that separator, and I'm a real green thumb, and I do love to see vegetation and things like that injected into our streetscape. My only kind of issue with this type of approach is these planter boxes tend to look very, very nice on day one, but as the seasons change and things get much bigger or things die off, is that actually going to be maintained, and who's going to look after that? And if it is, going to be maintained, does that mean the bicycle lane needs to get closed off, or is the traffic lane going to get closed off? For some reason, I don't think it'll be the traffic lane. And so there's that kind of issue there as well with just the maintenance of those things. Not saying don't do it, but they can also have those leaf litter issues and pouring more dirt and soil onto the bicycle facility, which is not great. Also, just the height of them, they can be a pedal risk, so a pedal strike risk, sorry. So riders could, if they were moving around a corner, could accidentally strike their pedal on those things. Another example of this planter box. Any ideas in the chat where this photo is taken? I'll give you a clue. It's not in Australia. Where in the world do you think this one is? Auckland. It is in Auckland. We've got a few New Zealanders with us. Federal Street in Auckland. They did a bit of a tactile urbanism project through this location here. Used this type of planter boxes as well as much lower speed humps as well. This is what looks closer to the intersection and kind of validates that concern I had of planter boxes that get struck, require some maintenance, and falling onto the carriageway there, and it can look very pretty, but it can also be a bit of a nuisance if you're in the maintenance game. Another question for the group. Lots of questions today, and we'll give a prize out for this one. I've got this little product here, and I want you to tell me, what do you think the name of the product is? And the clue that I've got is it is named after an animal. I'll give you 15 seconds.
I don't think you even needed to give people 15 seconds. They're all over it, Max.
I said 15 seconds so I could have some water.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I either
It-
really remember it quickly or I'm like, what is that thing?
Yeah.
Is it
Do you know the
called?
answer, Catherine?
Yeah, only because I've seen everyone write it. And in capitals too.
Oh, sure.
Armadillo.
It is the armadillo. So that's the armadillo, in case you needed a reminder. I haven't been to the zoo lately. So it is a pretty good replica. And have you seen them in real life though, Catherine?
I reckon back in the day at Perth Zoo, maybe.
Sorry, I meant the bicycle treatment, not the animal.
I have in Perth the armadillos within the
Yes.
city. I've seen them used. I think they're terrible.
Yeah, no. So they are used in Perth and Fremantle over in WA. I haven't seen much of them on the East Coast, but happy to be corrected. And
Perth Zoo.
yeah, and I actually also like the name of the bumblebee. I think that's a much cuter idea. But anyway, they're called the armadillo. This is the other kind of range of products that they offer. This one's called the zebra, believe it or not. As kind of Catherine touched on, they're not doing a great job for separation, particularly this black and white, because it wonderfully camouflages in with the black and white carriageway. They're not exactly doing a great job of delineating the space. And because they're so low to the ground and just the shape of them, they don't actually offer a lot of, physical warning to a driver that they're veering out of their lane. So, yeah, not to say that don't do these types of things, but I don't think that they would be as effective as providing, more concrete curb or something which has a bit more of a vertical nature to them, which can really help delineate space. Things like guideposts and these types of paddles as well. So there's lots of different examples of these paddle type of separators being used. And I think that they do provide quite a good level of consistency to drivers, that's the edge of the lane. And that's where the bicycle lane starts. So, don't go any further. Of course, they are not a, rigid fixed object. So it's still possible for vehicle entry into the bicycle lane. So it's not like it's going to eliminate that as a risk, but I do think it provides improved delineation. Another separator here, this one is just like the single flexible bollard without the little plinth thing that it sits on. So it's just kind of bolted on. These ones don't fare too well, anecdotally, because I regularly see them struck. And this is a bit of a confusing example because this is a clearway zone. So at certain times of the day, you have got parking there. And that's why you needed some degree of separator, but at other times of the day, it's just a through traffic lane. They get hit all the time. I don't think that they're a great outcome really, but that's what's currently there. I might pause. I'll check we've got any questions and then we can have a break.
It was just a good observation around those bumblebee / armadillos. Armadillos can also be difficult to properly align when they are angled as chevrons, just like other separators. So Yeah,
Yeah.
tend to agree.
Very good. Yeah.
Good observation there. And quite a general, broad question for you, Max, which I'll, put it out there.
Mhm.
What would you recommend as the most effective, cost-effective option? Guess it.
Cost effective, I'd probably say these guys, or any of the bolt down type of treatments, which has the vertical elements. I think they do provide a lot of, delineation benefit. And it just provides that sense of this is my space as a rider and that's their space as traffic, and you don't feel like there's going to be any mixing or anything like that. Also, just in terms of internationally, these things are actually really, really widely used. So it's not just in Australia we would see this type of infrastructure. This is super, super common in America, Canada, parts of Europe. You'd see this kind of stuff, even like South America and parts of Asia and stuff like that. The document that I mentioned last module, the Global Designing Cities Initiative, that would completely support that statement. You can flick through that book and have a look what Chile's doing, and you'd see infrastructure like this being rolled out.
And just one more is around bus stops, Max. So bus stops within the cycle lanes, and I do understand you'll touch on this a bit later in today's session. Is that correct?
I believe I do have a slide on it in the next module. Yeah.
Yeah. So it'd be good to talk about it then. It's popped up quite a few times, and I think it's a good observation because it's certainly a real thing, and there's plenty of,
Absolutely.
Alrighty.
Well, we'll have a little break. So we'll say everyone back here in 4 minutes, please, and chance to go and get some water or go for a stretch.
Great. See you soon.
Back, everyone. Hopefully managed to get out for a stretch and we can get stuck back into content. So we get to start back with a little exercise. That time of day where we ask what's wrong with this photo. We've got a confused cyclist there. We've got Ken looking very befuddled. Get him out of the way so he can focus. What do you think is wrong with this photo, or what do you think is a risk within this image? 20 seconds, pop it in the chat. This particular section of road does not look like this anymore. By the way, there are protected bicycle lanes there now.
Is that St Kilda Road, Max?
It is indeed.
Yep. Nice. Few good observations there.
Some answers coming through. Good to see. Love to see the participation.
People with very good eyesight noticing those people walking within the bike lane.
Very well spotted. So we'll give a prize out to the second person who mentioned the dooring risk. So this is what we're trying to avoid, is having riders riding within that space there where a car door can open upon them. And as you can see, this could be perhaps an experienced cyclist, because that tends to be where riders will actually position themselves. They would rather put themselves closer to the live traffic lane rather than, in the middle of the bicycle lane or closer to the parking lane. That's actually quite a common positioning strategy that experienced cyclists use. And it's because there is a genuine fear of being doored. It's unfortunately a very common experience and not a fun experience either. But I will also give a prize out, Marissa, to the person that did mention that we do have some other users within the bicycle lane. We've got the cyclist there sorry, we've got someone on a scooter there, although you can't see the scooter, and someone on a skateboard. So that's just excellent vision. Anyway, dooring, that's what I wanted to focus on now. As I mentioned, the dooring width there, it's about 1.2 meters, obviously depending on the make and model of your car. Coincidentally, we actually tend to make our bicycle lanes 1.2 meters wide as well. Basically leaving absolutely nowhere for a rider to go, which is a clear design fault of this facility. And why we are really strongly recommending this is not what we should be going for going forward. We know that this does not offer the safety that we want for our cycling community. We want to reduce that or mitigate that as a risk as much as possible. I've got this video here. This one is of Ken, who's riding behind me using the 360-degree camera. It's just pointing backwards. And this is Ken using his very excellent reflexes to dodge a car door opening in front of him. But you can see just how quickly that could have turned out to be a collision, and suddenly that could have knocked Ken off the bike and then falling into the live traffic lane, which then has quite a significant secondary impact if there's another vehicle traveling through there. So luckily Ken was quick enough to get away from that one. Another example of this occurring where that person was also incredibly lucky not to have been struck by that vehicle. So we know that these on-road facilities are just not going to adequately provide that safety. So we should be providing designs that don't allow for that type of interaction. This was a research study done, I'm going to say about 10 years ago now in Vic Roads, which analysed hundreds of dooring collisions that had occurred using the police reports, then summarising, well, whereabouts, which door is that occurring? I kind of scratched my head a little bit as to why this study ever got, commissioned. But anyway, I'll go through it. 75% of dooring collisions were revealed to be occurring on the driver's side. And that is very unsurprising considering that the majority of our bicycle lanes are on that side of the vehicle. So that's one element. The other element is if you've got a vehicle, that's driving, then there's going to be someone opening that door. So that's the other thing that's not unsurprising to see, that the bulk of the trauma is on that side. Perhaps it is a little bit surprising to see that the passenger door side is so high. I would have expected that to be more like 95 and 5, but this is saying 75 and 25. So it is good to have that information. And the reason that you may get passenger side dooring conflicts is due to, if you could picture, I'll just use, a taxi service, and they are at a signalized intersection and their customers say like, yep, that's it for me. I'll just hop out here. Yeah, no worries. Out you go. They just swing open their door, not expecting to see a rider who could be filtering in that location to get in front of that taxi. And that's where that passenger side door collision can occur. But certainly you'd see the majority there on the driver's side. I've put this in once again from the Vic Roads document, perhaps something that I worked on, but I don't think it's revolutionary or anything. It's basically just a suggestion of, if you've got these different kind of road use, it used to be referred to as the smart roads, road use hierarchy. It's not called that anymore. But basically, if you've got a heavy vehicle route or things like that, well, what kind of treatments could be useful to investigate to help reduce the risk of car dooring collisions? And it's just, relocation of car parking, getting cyclists away or protected facilities. And if you look at the protected facilities, which is all of them, they're always green. They're always worth investigating. So just if you're doing any kind of options analysis, this one could be useful to refer to. I wanted to show this one as a bit of a trial that was completed 8 years ago or so. And this one was set up where it's a bit difficult to see because it's in shade, but see how there's like this green stripe? That is deliberately set up that way. They didn't just run out of paint. It's been installed at that location to encourage riders to ride here, away from the dooring zone. Interestingly, that is acknowledging that we actually want riders to get closer to the live traffic and closer to the tram lines because of how much of a risk it is to be within the dooring zone. So very, very interesting that they went with that, but they did go with this trial. And just some insights learned from the trial itself is there was a difference in cyclists moving over. So traditionally, cyclists were more within the middle. It did help with cyclists positioning themselves closer to that stripe, which is where they wanted them to be. Moved about 280 mil, so, ruler's length. They also did some qualitative research and stopped some riders on their commute and asked them what they felt about it. 75% of riders said that they felt more comfortable riding in this facility as opposed to not having it there at all, which I find staggering. But that's qualitative data. So I guess to some extent, you've got a bit of a subjective analysis. By no means do I see this as the solution to reducing dooring as a risk. I just thought it's an interesting trial that occurred. It's also still currently installed. So they were obviously quite happy with the results that were received and have continued to maintain it in this states. But by no means do I consider that this is what we should be doing. And it's going to significantly reduce trauma. New Zealand actually tried to do a similar thing. This is in Hastings over in NZ, where they, rather than paint all of this in green as like a conflict zone, they just did these green stripes, kind of dot, 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 all the way along, just like as a constant reminder to vehicles as they're crossing that that's not like a wide shoulder or something. That's actually a bicycle facility. Once again, I don't think this is going to really transform the world or do anything like that. You may have a slight reduction or a perceived level of safety improvement, but I wouldn't necessarily be holding my breath to see that evaluation. But, oh, Marissa, is there a question?
We've just got someone wanting to know your preference, Max. Do you prefer to filter to the front when riding or sit in the queue?
Filter in the front, definitely. Yep, always.
Yep.
I like to position myself in the first and foremost, ready to go at the lights, and I'm quite happy to make cars and things wait for me. I just think it's better to get right in that line of view.
Yeah. All right. Thanks. That's all.
No, that's all right. We'll give a prize out for asking a personal question. That's good. I like that. Get to know me. Why not? My favorite color is red as well. We'll talk about some other on-road type of treatments and that aren't just like these trial types of things. Use of double chevrons. So the chevron is just a fancy name for that line marking that's installed. So it's like striped on an angled kind of thing. Double is because it is applied on the parking lane side as well as the traffic lane side. So you've got it on both the sides there. And I'm sure, as you could appreciate, if you've got those buffer zones, they're also referred to as buffer zones, on both sides. It does take up quite a bit of space, but sometimes that can be quicker to install than have to install protected bicycle lanes. So this could be used as an interim treatment. So once again, just wanted to say, I'm really recommending investigation into protected bicycle lanes, but this is other things that we can do if we're unable to achieve that. I've included some dimensions and things like that there if you are interested in to see what kind of space that this does require. Generally, the chevron width is 600 mil though. You could also put the chevron on one side. So either on the parking lane side or the traffic lane side. Now, how do you make that decision? Well, there is a little bit of guidance to suggest that if your parking lane is in a timed zone, so say it's 2-hour parking, that would indicate that you've got a high turnover of traffic and you've got lots of doors opening. That's when you'd put the chevron on the parking lane side, because the risk is exacerbated because you've got more exposure to doors opening. Once again, just the figures if you want to take down those dimensions. As mentioned, you can also put the chevron on the traffic lane side, and that's where you may not have that time restriction. Now, of course, that's a pretty loose guidance, and I think things need to be thought through very much on a case-by-case basis. Anecdotally, I would much prefer to see it on the parking lane side kind of at all times, because I'm much more scared of a door opening on me than a vehicle in this space. Traveling down here has excellent sight lines, and yes, they may veer out into the bicycle lane, but I still consider the dooring risk to be a bit more of a concern because I'm not within their field of vision. But that's just subjective. So that's the guidance that tends to be used. High turnover of car parking, put the buffer on the parking lane side. And there's the dimensions for that one as well. Exclusive bicycle lanes, we see these used a lot on our kind of arterial network. And I think it's actually really, really good that we're not just saying we've got, 2 or 3 traffic lanes. We're also saying, no, we are including provision for a cycle lane as well, which I think is excellent. But I think we can go a step further. And if you've actually demarcated that space and say, I need to maintain this connection all the way through this corridor, then you should be able to put some degree of separator there as well. So we shouldn't just be like exclusive bike lane, that's it, job's done. No, we should be going like, I should really be trying to elevate that delineation and ensure that I'm doing as best as I can to reduce the risk of vehicles veering into that bicycle lane. These wide curbside bike lanes, they seem to be all the rage a few decades ago, and we've certainly still got several of them out on our network. It's also, some people refer to as like a bit of a breadcrumb bicycle lane. It's this ... bicycle symbol, 200 meters later, same ... It's still in our Australian standards, so that's why, you may still see it and why it's still recognized. I think they're awful. I don't think they offer any degree of protection. I think within that mid-block section where there's no facility, it just looks like a wide traffic lane. You'd have no idea that that's a bicycle lane. In this particular, screenshot that I've taken here, this is 80 kilometers per hour. You've just come off a freeway. Riders are traveling uphill. They're probably struggling. Like, this is a steep hill. And other vehicles are absolutely speeding past. This is a terrible instance for on-road facilities, but particularly for wide curbside lanes. In these types of examples, you'd really want to be saying, no, we're putting the bicycle lane behind that curb, push you off the road. This is just not an appropriate instance to have you there. So I don't think there's much benefit at all to wide curbside bike lanes, or where you've got bike lanes shared with the parking lane. I think that's, similar. Just doesn't work when you're trying to share those two things. So look for alternatives there. So we have gone through quite a lot of different treatments available. And this guide that I keep referring to very conveniently does provide a little bit of an idea of what are the safety, comfort, space, cost implications of these different treatments. Really, really useful to help guide your decision making if you are progressing these projects. So this is just a note there. All right, mixing traffic. So there are, once again, some schools of thought within this. Some practitioners don't believe that this is a feasible solution. Others, like myself, believe that we can make this work. We can slow down vehicles and we can share the traffic lane. We can allow that commingling. But there is some debate within industry as to how this is actually achieved. And I will start by saying that we are teaching, this content is all referenced and we're using, what's currently within our guidelines. By all means, there could be future research which suggests that, we should be doing X, Y, and Z instead, but this is reflecting of what's currently within our guidelines and, how currently our jurisdictions would treat these areas. So mixing traffic is all about low speed, low volume traffic routes. All right? You really want to ensure that your vehicles have got not an option to travel at high speeds. And what mixing traffic actually involves is the use of sharrows, which I'll show you in a moment, so that riders no longer have to position themselves as close to the curb as possible. They can ride right in the middle of the traffic lane. The photo I've got here is actually not an example of a mixed traffic, but one where I think would be beneficial, because where this rider is currently positioning themselves is right within the dooring zone. And because of this median here, you get this, bank up of traffic just ready to go around. And some of them try and squeeze in and then tunnel that rider even further into the dooring zone. And it's just such an awful environment. This is a residential, it is a collector, I suppose you could call it, but it doesn't need to have that throughput of traffic. It doesn't need to have high speeds. It could be treated with local area traffic management treatments, and it could be used as an area where we encourage riders to claim the traffic lane. Now, just to help you think about, well, what are the different types of speeds and types of treatments we could look at for riding? Where we've got speeds less than 40 kilometers per hour for vehicles, that's when we can consider lane sharing. Anything above that is just not appropriate. If we're looking at between 40 and 60 kilometers per hour, that's our protected bicycle lanes. Anything greater than that, that's off-road. So these are very much principle statements, and something that we should be adhering to, something that we should be looking to. But ultimately, every project has got its own constraints and things like that. So it's useful as a reference, but acknowledge that you have to work with what you've got. Now, the reason that we're adopting the less than 40 kilometer per hour there for lane sharing, and I'm sure many of you would have seen this diagram before. I'm going to try and do a little drawing here. Actually, I'll do it on the next slide because I've got more space on the next slide. So that is a sharrow, for those that have not seen it. It is a shared arrow, and it is communicating that Riders, you can now claim the traffic lane, and it also communicates to drivers, hey, this is no longer just your traffic lane, just for you. This is now a shared space. So that's what that symbol is meaning. But just to talk about that diagram or figure that I said I was about to draw, probably seen this. If I have got on the y-axis the probability of a fatality occurring, and along my x-axis, I've got the collision speed. And this is the speed of a vehicle hitting a cyclist. Okay, so that's what I'm about to draw. This probability graph looks something like this. That's a pretty dramatic exaggeration of it, but vaguely looks like that. And what we find is around this point here, we see things get exponentially worse for cyclists. Basically, once you get past that point there, it becomes incredibly likely that a cyclist will be killed. They're just not able to withstand that force. And that speed there is 30 kilometers per hour. So whenever we've got potential conflict points between our general traffic, passenger vehicles, heavy vehicles, and cyclists, we want to manage speeds to 30 kilometers per hour or below. And I know what you're thinking. That is not at all what our network looks like. And you are 100% right. But that is what we are saying, particularly within these shared spaces where we're mixing traffic. We really want to see low vehicle speeds because we do not have the luxury of maintaining high speeds and not expecting to see fatalities occurring if a cyclist is struck. So that is the target that we've got. Here's some examples of this mixed traffic idea in action. So that's the Sharrow being used kind of at the start or entering this precinct. And I'll just zoom in on the utility pole there. This is actually a 30 kilometer per hour speed limit area, which is pretty exciting. Unfortunately, most jurisdictions aren't as excited by the 30 kilometer per hour as I am, but really, really good to see that this has gone into effect. This one is actually in a rural town out in Western Victoria in Warrnambool. Shout out to Warrnambool if you've been there, lovely place. Another little town that has managed to get a 30 kilometer per hour speed in and is also like, well, I'm going to let cyclists kind of claim the traffic lane and ride straight down the middle of this beautiful high street because I don't really want to do protected bicycle lanes and, you know, have to rebuild all this heritage curb and things like that. Like that's going to be a really expensive project for me. So instead, I'm going to reduce the speeds. I'm going to implement different treatments to ensure that operating speeds stay low and let riders take that prime position. This is the Sharrow Flower in Portland, Oregon. I was lucky enough to be in Portland a few months ago and got to do lots of wonderful cycling around that fantastic city. And they're a massive fan of using Sharrows. In fact, what has been a very, very common approach within Portland is they would, you know, accept this one arterial is the traffic corridor. It's like, that's where we're going to have lots of trucks and buses and general traffic. Like, that's fine. We're not going to put our cyclists there. Not a good environment. It's too hard anyway. So we're going to give them the parallel route, which goes through residential streets. Right? And every couple blocks, we are going to block off traffic so they just can't rat run through that parallel alternative. Only riders can and pedestrians. So they've definitely adopted this as an approach. And it was about 1991 is when Portland decided to, these emojis. 1991, Portland decided to, transform their network and become the bicycle mecca of the US. And since then, they've tripled their numbers of cycling participation. And it's solutions like this. It's not always by having every single route with protected bicycle lanes, which is excellent. It's just saying that, our residential streets don't need to have fast moving traffic and they don't need to hit every single street. Like, it can be a nuisance for them. Alrighty, let's go back into it.
I think
Marissa.
I think the emojis are coming to you on purpose now, Max, because
I think
you
I
told me
shouldn't
that
have
I shouldn't have mentioned it.
I jinxed it. Do I have any questions?
I'll throw it over to Catherine.
You sure do, Max. There's lots of questions around the mixed space and the speed zone. So why is it 40 on that dial where the research says it should be 30?
Great question. Let's give a prize out there. So the
prizes.
diagram. Oh, a few people said that, or
Yes, yeah, it was good observation.
I'll go back to the diagram. Less than 40. So it's being a little bit tricky there. So it could have said 30 and less, but it said less than 40. I also think the reason that wording has been put in is because we are so far from getting 40 kilometers per hour, being accepted in residential streets. We can't even do 30. So if we put a 30 there, people would be looking at this and be like, well, that's just not feasible. Like, I physically cannot get the approval to put a 30 and do this shallow treatment, so I can't do this at all. So it's trying to say that this is like a step change, I suppose you could call it.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I remember, and this is probably showing my age a bit, but I remember when we reduced to 50, and that was a big deal. And it was like 50. And so now we see the 30 as the 50. That's, it's just, we just need to be rolling it out and align with Europe and all those wonderful cities that have amazing uptake of cycling and reduced speed environment.
I'm surprised you remember the 60 to 50.
Oh, I do.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I think maybe because we emigrated from the UK and it was such a backwards thing.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, so maybe that's probably why it's stuck in my brain. But anywho, moving on. Thanks for that, Max. There was a fair bit of some queries around the sharrows and the community's perspective on sharrows, on what they actually mean. Is there some research around that you know of?
It's a very good question. I mean, because we work in this space and we understand them, it's probably not too difficult to comprehend, but we shouldn't be taken as the target audience because we work within traffic and transport. Anecdotally, these shallow treatments got implemented just around the corner from where my mum lives, and she called me up and said, what does this mean? What's going on? What do I do? Yeah. Why is there a bicycle lane in the middle of my street? And I had to explain it to her, and she understands it, but I do think that there is a lack of motorist understanding of what that symbol means. And there's work to be done with either campaigning or, marketing material to help with that messaging. But also everyone here in this, conversation today can now share this knowledge of this is what a shower is. This is how you're meant to, react or behave within that environment. It's not just your traffic lane anymore. It's a shared space. So just keep the message going out there.
And just one more for you around the research theme. So I've seen research from the UK saying painted bike lanes can actually increase total road user casualties compared to no bike lanes at all. Do you think using things like chevrons and interim solutions can actually damage the chance to get protected cycle lanes put in some cases?
Fabulous question. I will also point to two other papers. So one research out of Boston a couple of years ago actually did an evaluation of the Sharrows installed there and found that they were relative to the before case of them being installed, increasing the level of trauma for riders because of the participation rates. And there was a bit of a fear within the industry that, oh, wait, these treatments may not be doing what we think they're doing. They're not improving things at all. They're making things worse for cyclists. Some within the industry still have that opinion. The research paper also stipulates that it only focused on these particular blocks within Boston or Chicago. I can't remember what it was, sorry. And so it could actually be reflective of those environments were not appropriate for Sharrows, or it could be the community within that specific area that was analysed were completely unaware of what that means, as was once again not an appropriate location for those Sharrows. And it reflected that within the research as well, and saying like, this is one example that's been analysed, and there needs to be further research completed to get a broader understanding of how effective this treatment is. As I started off in the start of this session, we teach this with respect to what currently our guideline says, and currently Sharrows are within the suite of tools that we can use. I personally do think that they add value, but there is a possibility that they're not as effective as I would suggest. Now, the other research paper I was going to mention there is something out of Melbourne done by Ben Beck and co, which did analyze different cycling treatments. So things like on-road bicycle lanes where it is the wide curbside and you're mixing with the parking lanes and all those types of things. All of those treatments were seen as better than not doing anything. So there's also lots of evidence to say, you're putting down stencils which have the bicycle facility and you're encouraging more riders to go through there, even the fact that you've got an increase in number, like safety in numbers, also adds to the safety benefit. So that there is, it's a working space, I suppose.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Max.
Oh, no worries. Speaking of where not to put Sharrows, this is a horrific example of what not to do. So for those that do have any light rail or tram corridors, you may be aware that cyclist tyres get stuck in those facilities quite commonly, and they, create a destabilizing risk and means you fall over quite easily. So not putting your Sharrows that would suggest you're trying to get riders into that position and trying to cross that. If you do have to cross those types of facilities, you want to be crossing them between 60 and 90 degrees, closest to 90 as possible. So that one, I can confirm, did not last very long. The cycling community quickly got onto council to remove those ones. This is how we can manage our speeds where we are proposing our Sharrows. So local area traffic management treatments, for those that do work within any councils, you'd be incredibly familiar with these types of devices. Things that slow down traffic, that make it inconvenient for traffic, try and reduce the risk of rat running and things like that. Can also help support that idea of lower speeds and the use of Sharrows. So difficult to see there, but there is a Sharrow just after that speed hump there. I also really like this one as an example because riders don't have to worry about that hump. It's not their speed that we're trying to manage here. It's vehicles. So they get the nice through passage there, and vehicles have to slow down and give way. And I think I saw in the chat there, very, very well noticed that a resident has decided to colour in these hazard markers. They were doing a bit of a protest. This is in Adelaide a few years ago. There was an elderly woman who was very upset that these types of things got installed, and she decided to do some graffiti, and she got arrested for it. I included the ABC article so you can actually read it as well. Anyway, we'll give a prize out there. Good viewing. Another example of local area traffic management treatment with the cyclist kind of bypass being used there. But these ones are probably my favorite, where you're actually physically reducing the ability for vehicles to, pass through these areas. So creating these block-offs. So the permeability through these zones are just not there for vehicles. It's a bit difficult to tell from this angle, so I'll just go to an aerial image. And this is how things look. This is not a shower environment, it's a bicycle lane, but this kind of treatment can be implemented. If you're a vehicle, you would have to perform that type of movements to be able to continue through, which I'm sure, as you can appreciate, is not a great thing to be doing. It's a bit annoying. Whereas if you're a rider, you can just head straight on through. The disadvantage of this particular treatment is that we've basically introduced two conflict points that weren't there previously. You could have just driven straight through that and then didn't have to deal with that. So that's the disadvantage of it. But I'm still a big fan of doing things like this modal filtering, particularly with these full closures, which is, once again, I'll show this on the aerial. It's a bit clearer. If you're a rider, you can travel straight through there. If you're driving a vehicle, you cannot. You have to do a U-turn and you have to get back onto an arterial road, which is where your movements are being prioritized. And that's where that kind of traffic belongs. So actually physically restricting those type of movements and prioritizing your cycling networks, I'm a big fan of, particularly where you are looking at installing your sharrows as well. That's the end of the contents. I do want to go through our assignments. Just some images here of, once again, if you're doing on-road facilities, how are they going to end their journey? That's just a terrible example. Another really common one is having temporary traffic management, signs put in the bicycle lane, which is just annoying. So have to think about how that's managed on any of your projects. But I will chat through our assignment now, which on our learning management system, you'll once again get access to another 360-degree video to watch. And this one will have you riding through an protected bicycle lane. And then you'll get to compare that to riding adjacent the dooring zone. The two locations are about 300 meters away from each other. So it was very convenient to be able to try the different two. But hopefully, if you've never actually experienced riding in those different environments, that will give you a bit of an understanding of that perspective. But what I want to focus on now is the Module 2 assignment. So if you click on this task, you will see there's a Word document and a PDF document. And I'm going to spend a bit of time now going through that in a bit of detail, because we regularly get some feedback that's not everything was explained as well as we could. So I'm going to spend a bit of time now. We'll chat through it. You can ask your questions in a live format and hopefully get everyone over the line. So I've already downloaded the Word and the PDF. So let's hop into it. Instructions. Step number 1. Download and review the Module 2 design review file. That's the PDF. It's already saved there. Step 1 should be an issue. Review the existing conditions of the site using Google Street View. Okay, so I might just have a look at this PDF to help contextualize what we're talking about here. So I'm going to open up the PDF now. And it's 4 pages long. It is a street in Launceston called York Street. That's the extent of it there, that red line. There's notes in the top corner saying that we've only provided this for training purposes, and we please ask you not to share this outside this course. We don't want you talking about this to residents or to the local MP or writing to council. None of that, please. I don't want to get in trouble. This is just for the training course, okay? So what we'll get you to do is you flick through this design. If you've never reviewed designs before, that's okay. We can organize a session to just, spell out what's actually going on here, but there is a legend provided that should provide all the information that you require. And you basically just need to go through each of these sheets, have a think about what is being proposed, particularly for the cycling community, and then just keep that at the back of your mind. So it's only 4 sheets long. It's not very detailed or anything like that. And that's the first PDF document. Okay. Step number 2, reviewing the existing conditions of the site using Google Street View. We've also just provided a link to Google Street View as well, just to make it easier for you. So York Street, you can have a look via the aerial, or you can drop it down the little Street View person, and you can have a look at what the existing conditions look like. Step number 3 is filling out the table below. So let's have a look at the table below. We've got 3 questions, and we've got a space there for you to write your response. Question number 1, how does the existing environment cater for cyclists? So what we want you to do is, reviewing the existing conditions, tell us, how does this environment provide for people that ride? How would a cyclist travel through there? Question number 2, how does the design cater for cyclists? So that one you would need to reflect on your PDF and articulate exactly how that design provides cycling connectivity through York Street. Number 3, what treatments or changes in the design could you recommend to improve the safety for cyclists? And you'll notice that we've highlighted name 3. We regularly get dozens of responses here, so we just want you to focus on 3 solutions, 3 design changes that could be implemented to improve the safety for cyclists. All of these responses, we're very happy to have dot pointed. We don't need full sentences. We don't need you writing, lots of paragraphs and things like that. What we will be marking you on is you are using the correct language, and that's you are actually recommending things that would improve the safety for cyclists. Okay, so that is the assignments. You insert your name as suggested, just so we've got, a copy of all that. And then we'll get you to actually upload this as a document to the LMS. And I'm going to go back to the LMS so you can have a look at how that is done. Oh, I'll need to change my view. I'm currently in teacher mode. So this is what it'll look like for you. And there's a button there that just says add submission. You click on that. And then you can drag and drop that file. And then we will get a notification saying that, Bart Simpson has just uploaded their assignment, and we can then grade it. And we will provide you feedback if you, were unable to achieve the 100 or 100% or 80% or whatever it is. We'll give you some feedback to suggest how we could, get that perfect score. But yeah, we'll also provide feedback if you do get the 100%, because we love to see it. Are there any questions about the Module 2 assignments? So all of that is saved on the LMS.
When's it due, Max?
It is due on Monday, the 11th. So it's relatively soon. And the
Yeah.
reason for that is because we don't want you to spend a long time of this. In fact, we've given you a little bit of extra time at the end of today's session. You could probably knock it off then. It's a good time to do it. If it's taking you longer than 20 minutes, it's taking you too long. So we don't want you to spending lots and lots of time on this. We want you to download these things, get stuck into it, upload it, and then think of your other duties that you have to do as part of your job and work, family life and stuff.
Great. Well, I think that's pretty clear. If you have any questions, please pop them in the chat or email it through. Yeah, Catherine, any questions from you?
Oh, just a question on the first assignment. Is that also due on the 11th as well? Or was that?
Quiz.
The quiz.
Oh, it was
Yeah.
a quiz.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the quizzes. So we've got a quiz for module 1. Look, ideally, we would love for you to look, as long as everything's sort of completed, probably by the due date. So we've got another assignment. We've got another quiz for module 3, and there'll be another assignment for module 4. Again, nothing that will take you too long to do, but the quicker that you get all the tasks done, you'll be issued with your certificate of completion. So yeah.
Just smash it out. Smash it out
Yeah.
now. That's my recommendation.
Quizzes shouldn't take more than 5 minutes to do.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, we will sort of follow up with you after the completion of the course, if you've got any tasks that haven't been done as yet. But yeah, if you've missed, sorry, I'm just having a look at the chat. If you have missed any of the sessions, the recordings are available and will be available on the learning management system. So I'll upload today's recording in the next few hours. It just takes a couple of hours to process. And module 1 recording is available on that learning management system. So just under the module 1 heading, as is the quiz. Yes. Good.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks,
was just-
everyone.
Sorry,
Thanks,
Catherine.
I just noticed there was a question there on, can we get a CPD attainment record?
We issue, I'll get back to you, Harry, on that one. I'll email you outside of this session. Okay.
Thank you. Oh,
Oh,
you've
Marissa's gone.
turned
Oh,
into a
that-
shadow.
Oh, no, look at that.
Her superhero.
Batman,
powers.
I know, they're taking over. Well, thanks everyone for joining in. Thanks, Max, and thanks, Catherine.
Thank
Excellent.
you.
We'll see you
Thanks,
next week.
everyone.
Come early for some trivia.
Yes.
Yes.
Get the
Yeah, well,
emojis going.
Cheers, everyone. Thanks for a good session.